The older I get, the more I struggle with this fleeting insecurity that I don't really have a place. I even started this channel because I felt like I had nowhere to really express myself, and it's been such a blessing to do that, but it didn't fix my problem. Who am I? Who am I supposed to be?
I'm high and I'm vibing. I mean, I'm straight.
Like, they'll base their opinion off someone else's opinion because they don't want to be like the odd man out. Like, that's what scares me.
Man, I don't like that.
That puts so much, like, dude, you don't like that goddamn shirt. Why did you wear that? Because it's the tight thing right now. You don't even look comfortable.
You think we'll ever have a gay rap artist?
Maybe
Openly
one day.
gay?
That would be, but that's like, why does that matter?
I know.
Like, if he want to dudes or whatever, why does that matter? Like, why do we care?
You dream of walls that hold us in prison. It's just a skull, at least that's what they call it, and we're free to roam.
This is the moment that I realized Blonde would be a generation-defining album. It's a philosophical moment, one of regret and sorrow, but also catharsis, as it takes refuge in the knowledge that everyone who hears it will be better equipped to deal with the metaphorical prison that Frank has been in. I've wanted to go in depth on Blonde for a really long time now, but to be honest, I didn't know if there was anything else I could say. It's one of the most popular projects of the 2010s, it's maintained and even grown in cultural and musical relevance since 2016, and every year that Frank doesn't drop new music, it gets more and more scrutinized. But Frank's silence is actually what pushed me to think about his enigmatic lack of a persona on a more personal level. There's so much conversation around Frank Ocean. Will he release new music or not? Here's how influential his music is. Here's a tiny detail I found in a random Frank Ocean song from 10 years ago. And it seems like the more chatter there is around Frank's artistry, the more egregiously his fans just miss the point. A quote that I see frequently about the themes on Blonde originates from Fantastic Video breaking down Frank's lyrical approach.
Frank disappeared for 4 years between projects to actually live a life before telling us about it.
But to be honest, I don't know if I agree. A lot of the project reads like a heartbreak story, a chronicled diary entry regarding a failed relationship between Frank and one of his first loves. Self-Control, Godspeed, Ivy, they're all looked at as inherently romantic, but if you really read between the lines and think about this album existentially, which is how it's written from every measurable angle, there's a much more significant artistic intent at play. Instead of being upfront about the introspective narratives on the project, Frank uses romance as a conduit to describe his relationship with himself. The supposed lover he addresses throughout the entire project is always his current, past, or desired self, which always seems to be right at the horizon, but just out of reach. The project is not about a failed relationship with somebody else and how Frank dealt with that trauma. That's too simple, it's too easy. Blonde is actually an interrogation of self, an internal resurrection. This is an album about Frank trying to let go of his own self. But what is that version of Frank that he's letting go of? What's moving him to drop this side of himself that was comfortable, that was happy, that didn't grow and wasn't true to himself and lied? Oh man. Frank knew that we would call this a heartbreak album. He knew that if it read like a breakup story, it would have that simple, short-sighted label strapped on it, and it's worth asking the question of why he played into that narrative intentionally. And I think it's because it helped him keep control. It's a complete bastardization of what he's actually trying to say on the project, but at least he knew what was going to happen. We don't always get that choice. He got to practice the luxury of picking your poison, which I guess is a funny thing when you think about it. This is really an album about duality, night and day, life and death, the reality and fantasy, hypocrisy and sincerity. The album somehow represents every single one of these things, yet fails to exhibit one cohesive progression or arc between the two. And the more I listen to this project, the clearer it becomes that that was intentional. This is the story of Frank Ocean, the one trying to teach a generation to live and let live, because he's never had the luxury himself. The project opens in what sounds like a dream state. Nike's is defined by these ethereal, swelling synthesizers and spacey hi-hats, which is really just camouflage for the deeply rooted unrest and internal struggle going on inside of Frank's psyche. The video for the song features two simultaneous vocal tracks, the chipmunked high-pitched singing and a low-pitched ramble that distracts and takes away from the original song entirely. On first glance, it seems silly to release a version of the song like this, but it actually makes the emotional standpoint of Nike's clear in a way that we wouldn't otherwise be able to understand. The song seems to blast materialism and consumer culture, criticizing people for only wanting Nikes or wanting a ring like Carmelo, which is commentary he's tackled in the past. But Frank's acknowledgement of the destructiveness consumerism causes is actually a vessel, a literary device he uses to kickstart the cycle of the album. Frank was at peace. He was happy. And then everyone else got in the way. Until we all just had to tell him how great Nikes were and that he had to have a pair. Nikes is not a shallow commentary on American culture, it's a representation of societal pressures and how they force us to move away from our natural path of growth. How everyone else in the world can't just let you exist, they have to destroy your peace and innocence and put you on a path towards somewhere completely undesirable until it's not. The outro to the song sees Frank vowing to protect the subject he's speaking to, which is metaphorical for himself. Since everybody else wants Nikes, Frank has decided he's going to change and become someone new, to figure out who he's supposed to be by redefining life itself. This is indicative by the two conflicting voices in the music video for the song. There's the younger, more innocent Frank that was happy and ignorant, and there's the new Frank bred by social norms and seeks to destroy that innocence in place of success, whatever that might look like. He describes the relationship between his new and old personality in sexual terms, describing their meshing as making love, which lets the old Frank know that even if this isn't what you want, or need, or should participate in, it's for the best. Just trust me, we can do this, even if you might not be ready for the change. Until everything falls apart.
I thought that I was dreaming when you said you loved me.
Despite the fact that we're only 2 tracks in, Ivy is a moment on the project where Frank is stripped of his innocence. The song is an allegory, a metaphorical tale depicting Frank's experience being forced out of his young, naive, and ignorant state. The version of Frank that was singing on Nikes vowed to protect him and nurture him, but Ivy details a self-betrayal that leads to a horrible tale of heartbreak and bitterness. The chorus explains how he was infatuated with the potential that their relationship showed and how obsessed he was, but that just turned out to be manipulation. It's representative of Frank being forced to do something he wasn't ready for, wasn't comfortable with, and definitely isn't grateful for doing. So now not only has Frank's life been ruined, but they've ruined the possibility of trying to replicate the way things were. Because, well, they'll never be those kids again. Approaching this metaphor with the concept of young puppy love was the perfect way to illustrate the struggle Frank is experiencing here. It seems like something you want to do, something that's ultimately good for you, but once you're in too deep and it's too late, you're forced to face the fact that it's not. And I think most of us would co-sign that that's often what young romance leads to, but it's indicative of something bigger we all deal with too. Growing up. We've all done it. We've changed our life direction, made a choice we didn't want to make, wasted our time on something that just wasn't worth it because apparently that's what growing up is. Why does growing up have to mean self-betrayal? Why does it have to entail being forced into things we don't care about? All this broken, vicious circle leads to is brokenness and depression, yet we still do it. Frank's metaphorical lover in the song is actually a part of himself owned by society. It's the culture taking over his psyche and telling him what he is and what he's supposed to be, and the demise of the relationship is Frank's realization that maybe this isn't all it's cracked up to be. The first leg of the project caps off with Pink and White, which is an arc in and of itself, illustrating the inevitable moment of life where we're asked to become who we are, which really means becoming like everybody else. Ivy ends with a temper tantrum, a moment of juvenile anger reminiscent of the younger self Frank wishes he could go back to. It expresses a desire to regain his innocence. And I think we've all definitely felt that way, but my hope is that after our Ivy moment, we have a pink and white moment too. The track is a snapshot of peace, a moment where Frank expresses that he learned from his past experiences and actually gives up his control. In the first verse, he looks back on all of his memories, his metaphorical relationship in Ivy, and finally finds peace in moving on. Even though it didn't work out, he learned that we're not going to have everything we want. And sometimes the best thing to do is nod my head and not close my eyes, which more or less means smile and wave. It's not realistic to be as happy as you were then, so the best way to react to it is accept that and move on. The outro references some fragments of Frank's youth, his pre-Nikes time, and he credits his old self for teaching him to live and love. That part of him is immortal, in a way, since he lives on in his memory. As we get older, there are a lot of moments where we just want to go back to the way things were, but I hope we can find this place among the pain of daily struggle too. If we change our mindset a little bit, we can be okay and at peace with the way our lives have changed. Innocence doesn't last forever, but nothing does. And that's okay. So yeah, I've let that go. Peace and happiness and joy, the idealism of a child, but if I'm not chasing that, what do I do with my life? I still need love. I still need support. I can't just do everything myself. Everybody's gone now, though. It's different. My life is just pain. I don't know. I guess I'll call mom.
Many college students have gone to college and gotten hooked on drugs, marijuana, and alcohol. Listen.
Now, I know this isn't actually Frank's mom on the phone here, but narratively in context with the project, it is absolutely meant to represent a phone call from mother. And I can't decide whether I love or hate this interlude because it's hard to listen to in a way that hits really close to home for pretty much everybody. It's ironic. After 3 experiences that have left him lost, a reminder to be yourself is exactly what Frank's character needs right now, but the execution from the messenger is representative of the problem that this entire album hinges on. Imagine being in a place of conflictedness, a time in your life where you can't find direction, and then potentially your biggest role model gives you the cathartic advice of just follow your heart or do what makes you happy. And then right after that, they define exactly what that should mean for you. That's exactly what this song is. Rosie Watson encourages us to just be yourself and then rants about smoking weed for the entire runtime of the track. Even your own mother. There's no love, no support, no appreciation for individuality. All life is a cycle of someone else telling you who to be and the sadness that comes after it. At this point in the project, Frank realizes that he can't let anybody else help him find his identity, because it inevitably leads to someone else strapping a label on it that isn't his. Only once you take a step outside of that pressure, a leap of faith into the unknown, can you find out who you really are. By finally being solo, Frank finds the true undercurrent of remorse.
Hand me a towel, I'm dirty dancing by myself, gone off
When you're a kid and people just you hey, like at show and tell, like, hey, look at what I've been doing, look what I have, and people are like, oh, that's like this, that's like this, that's like this, and not allowing you to just exist. You're like, well, what are we like? And it's some shit that you don't know. You start like pushing back, like, stop fucking saying that I'm like what I don't know.
Right. Even if it's a compliment.
Yeah, even if it's a compliment, like, let me live. So it's literally like any young kid, you just start rebelling against it.
Solo is an existential snapshot, a moment in space and time where for the first time in this narrative, Frank removes himself from the struggle he's experiencing and finally starts to understand. It's, in a really weird way, a smoking anthem, which is interesting considering it stands in stark contrast to the previous track where Frank is specifically being asked not to smoke. And so by finally escaping the cycle of taking other people's advice on what self should mean to him, Frank finds and acknowledges his struggle with duality. Blonde is an album obsessed with duality. The branding for the album itself is indicative of that down to the spelling of the title. But Solo is an awkward realization that Frank doesn't have an identity. He's completely stuck between 2 versions of himself, who he was and is, and who he's supposed to be. The refrain speaks of a bull and a matador dueling in the sky as they fight for a spot in heaven. Only one of them can win, and one will fall from heaven down into hell. But Frank follows this statement by saying, in hell, there's heaven. The two meanings of the line, in hell and in hell, represent two potential paths to metaphorical heaven. Frank can either smoke and ascend into the sky with the winner, or stay down in hell where the loser will eventually fall. The question that remains now is, well, which one leads to real heaven? The ambivalent semantics in this track continue with the word solo. For the first time in the project, he's truly by himself. He's outside of his struggle looking in and trying to decide what to do. He's solo. But simultaneously, this realization has led to a state of depression. He's now privy to this disastrous cycle of mental slavery and the rat race he's lived his life suffering in, and he doesn't know how to escape. He's emotionally so low. Frank wasn't naive, he wasn't ignorant, he didn't have to turn into something he's not, but everybody else around him convinced him otherwise, and now that he's realized it, the damage is done. He doesn't know who he is now. This cycle we live in is horrifying, but how do we escape it? How do we stop conflictedness from ruining our life?
This is joy, this is summer. Keep alive. Stay alive.
Skyline 2 is just kinda numb. It's not happy, it's not sad, it's kinda unsettling in that way. Considering it follows the lowest point on the record emotionally, this track has always come off like the first few seconds after blazing hot water hits your skin. You know what's just happened and that it's going to be devastating in some way, but your body hasn't caught up to that realization yet. It's a horrifying few seconds of expecting and knowing exactly what that pain is going to be like, but not feeling it yet. It's like realizing that summer's not as long as it used to be, that your innocence is gone, that your happiness is gone, and all we have left is our memories and the feelings they give us, whether that's for better or for worse. You gotta learn to let go, man. Even if it's not that simple.
Poolside convo about your summer last night.
I don't know if I can do it. Just one more night. Please let me have one more night. I don't think I can do it. I can't let go. Please.
We gotta leave. Take down some summertime. Give up just a night.
Self-control is heartbreaking. The song expresses some development of self, some ability to let go, but Frank still has this attachment to his inner self that he's been trying so hard to force out. He says at the end of the first verse that he wishes they'd grown up on the same advice, which actually wraps up a lot of the first half of the project. He's changed now, he's a new person, but he still misses his old self. Continuing the allegorical illustration of a love interest being his old self, Frank asks his lover to keep a place for him, and that he'll sleep between him and his new lover, that being self-control. When he lost his innocence, Frank gained self-control. But there's a part of him that still hopes to retain that youthful jubilance, even if it's at the cost of his newfound quote-unquote maturity. He knows that he has to move on, that he has to do something with his life. We have to go join everybody else now, and I want to accept that. I want to believe that growth is the best thing for him, that there's an identity out there to embody, but I just can't see one. And from the looks of it, he doesn't either. The outro begs his lover to stay with him, to give up on growth just for one more night, and to be with him. But that's not reality. All these encounters are just fruitless. That's the punishment for being the good guy, I guess.
It's a good guy, he hooked it up.
After finally letting go, after being forced to try and change, Frank tries to fill that void, and it doesn't work. The song details a blind date with another man, and since this is one of the only moments on the project that touches on homosexuality, I will mention it here. This project is not about Frank and a journey of homosexuality. It's not about being a sexual minority, about his orientation, or about a relationship he had with another man. I really don't like when people say that about this project because it waters down the narrative to something too simple. It waters it down to a label. Frank actually plays into this label with the ambivalence of the title. The masculine spelling of the word is branded on the cover, but the actual name of the project uses the feminine spelling. And I really don't think he did this to indicate the project being about bisexuality. I think he did it because it gave him a scapegoat so that he could have narrative freedom. Think about it. We don't know anything about Frank. He's an enigma, completely gone from the public eye. We don't know any of the inner happenings of his life. Most musicians get a lot of mileage out of their fame lyrically. They address relationships, social media, beef with other artists, and their business ventures. But in the case of Frank Ocean, none of his dirty laundry is out there for us to see. And what this does is give Frank control. Control over his narrative, control over the way he asserts himself, the ability to decide how we ultimately perceive him. Or does it? This project is so vague and unclear because Frank knew that we would ultimately just call it a project about the one thing we can label him as, that being an LGBTQ musician. But by highlighting his duality on the branding for the project, maybe, just maybe, people will actually pay attention to the real story at hand. I think that's why young people have connected with this project so much. For the first time in many of their lives, it's easy to relate with somebody else, because it's just another young, struggling kid having an internal conversation with himself, trying to figure out who he is, and somehow just never finding the words.
Round your city, round the clock.
After 8 songs of figuring out how to do it, Nights sees the re-establishment of Frank's identity in something different, something new. He's finally dismissed his old way of life and he's ready to move on. Frank spends the first half of the song delivering a melodic rap verse over this summery, vibrant guitar riff and keyboard arpeggios. He victoriously claims that he's moved on with his life and his past self should too. He asks him if he's called him from a seance, which means that while there might be a small part of himself seeking to reconnect with his youth, that part of his soul has died. The pre-chorus is a yearning for a new beginning, and the bridge seems to address a new lover, a new person that has entered into Frank's headspace. Since he's broken apart from the old Frank, it's as if he's ushering in a new era of his life. And this moment is kind of horrifying, actually. After sticking to his guns for so long, for being so beaten up about having to change, to grow up, to become the person he's supposed to be, Frank finally gives up on himself. There's nothing glamorous about that. It's sad, it's regretful, you can never go back, and the older you get, the harder that is to ignore and the less peaceful your life is. How can that be fair? Well, it's not. But if we can embrace it, if we can take that leap of faith, maybe it won't be so bad. And finally, at the exact halfway moment of the project, Frank has finally dissociated from who he was and fully commits to becoming who he's supposed to be. There's an immediate tone shift here. It's slick and smooth, but also inauthentic. Frank's last verse comes off cold and uncaring. There's no emotional vulnerability here. In a moment that's supposed to be grand and victorious, it ends up likening more to the scene in a movie where the bad guy wins. Sex and drugs and money. That's what Frank cares about now. That's the American dream. That's what he's been looking for this whole time. And don't try and talk to him about it because he doesn't want the conversation. The nights might be rough, but at least he's found a direction now. I guess the question is that direction really where we want to go?
Solo that I can see under the skirt of an ant. Solo that I don't get high no more when I Geronimo, I just go hand.
In a complete 180 to the first rendition of the track, the reprise of Solo is schizophrenic, with Andre 3000 delivering one of his most uncanny features to date. The song stands in stark contrast to its predecessor. Where Solo was an emotional low point on the project, the reprise brings the tone upward and has an intensely uplifting edge, even if that mood is a thin veil. The song takes a different approach on the concept of being solo, as Andre vents about feeling alone in romance, in society, and in the music industry. However, where Frank sung metaphors about the bull and matador was an existential cry for identity, this moment sees Frank wallowing in his newfound direction with so much conviction that he feels alone out of a sense of superiority rather than being lost. And it's unwritten, but still obvious that the former is somehow a much worse way to live your life. But I don't know, it doesn't feel that way. This is kind of nice. The other side is such a rush. We're kind of on a roll now. I like this. We're doing pretty good. The leap of faith did pay off. This is pretty sweet.
I
was just telling that I got this girl before, and I was together since 3 years, and I was not cheating her or what, and Facebook arrived, and she wanted me to accept her on Facebook, and I don't want it because I was like in front of her, and she told me like, accept me on Facebook. It was virtual, means no sense. So I say, I'm in front of you, I don't need to accept you on Facebook. She started to be crazy. She thought that because I didn't accept her, she thought I was cheating. She told me like, it's over, I can't believe you. I say, come on, you're crazy, because like, yeah, I'm in front of you. I'm every day here in your house. That's it. It means like, it's jealousy. It's pure jealousy for nothing, you know? Virtual thing.
Facebook Story is the final interlude on Blonde, and like everything else on the project, a metaphor, and it's arguably the most pivotal moment on the album. The details of the song itself are pretty trivial. Frank's friend Sebastian details a story where he is broken up with because he didn't accept his significant other's friend request on Facebook. Even though the story itself is rather inconsequential, it's symbolic for hyperreality, the dilemma Frank's psyche hinges on throughout the album. Hyperreality refers to the evolution process where our relevant cultural symbols and signs blur the lines between what is real and what is not. Hyperreality is the phenomenon that has blinded this girl into thinking that a Facebook friend request could mean her significant other is cheating on her. But it's also the reason why everyone wants Nikes. It's the notion that all college kids just smoke marijuana and that's why they're not doing anything with their life. It's the obsession with an artist's sexuality and the thought that everything they make has to revolve around that. It's Frank Ocean thinking that he had to change. He had to grow up and become something entirely different than his natural state of being just because it's the thing to do. And it worked. For a while. The leap of faith was good. The cold, uncaring shtick served him well until it didn't. Until he got hurt again. And it wasn't his fault. And all this tells us is that no matter what we do, we will never control who we are or how people perceive us or what our actions will mean to everybody else. Growth, identity, self-image, it's all a paradox. So why try?
I'll be honest.
There's only one moment on Close to You that I want to highlight, and it's the last two lines. It actually builds on the point that is made in Facebook Story. It looks at the memories of Frank's time with his metaphorical lover, and he recognizes that even though they're not together anymore, they'll always be tied together by their common experience. So no matter how hard he tries, he'll never really get away. Growth isn't real. In order to lose your past self, you have to leave them behind, but at the end of the day, you still have those memories, you still carry that pain, you still relive those experiences, so even if you convince yourself you've changed, you're still just that scared little kid everyone wanted to grow up. And just like that, we're back at square one. This project doesn't have an arc. There's no resolution. But it's not a circle, the two halves aren't consistent with each other, so what is it? Well, maybe that's the point. There's no answers in this world. The only thing we really have is our memories. Because the present's never enough. We just end up taking it for granted until it's too late. And yeah, that's heartbreaking, but it can be kind of beautiful too.
Bad luck to talk on these rides.
I don't know what my favorite 5 songs of all time are, but White Ferrari is undoubtedly on that list. The track is composed of one airy synth and a few guitar licks over which Frank sings about his past life and the good memories he has through the metaphor of a white Ferrari. Frank looks back on this time fondly and reminds the song's subject that he still cares about them. The end of the third verse expresses one of my favorite moments on the entire project as Frank co-signs the concept of mind over matter, likening it to magic since life ends quickly, whether it's good or not. But the realization at the end of this song is what defines this entire project. The final lines start with the claim that Frank and his metaphorical lover, again that being his old self that he supposedly let go of, are taller. not in another dimension at least. The line expresses regret and a what could have been sentiment, but it's also a call to action. The rest of the bridge sees Frank lobbying for travel and seeing everything else that they haven't experienced, but it's not what you think. They're trapped, but not by something physical.
Dream of walls that hold us in prison. It's just a skull, at least that's what they call it, and we're free to roam.
It's not Frank's old self that he let go of. It's his true nature. The real existence of Frank is still there, but inside of his mind, deep down and scared and hiding. He claims to feel like a prisoner in his own mind, and yet more free there than ever because he has free will, unlike he did in reality. And finally, Frank realizes that his entire struggle throughout this album has all taken place inside of his own head. He always had the choice. Social norms don't matter. The pressure is not real. The only limits on who you are and who you want to be are inside of your own head. So once you can finally conquer that prison, you'll find that other dimension, that one where you're taller. So all we have to do now is, well, conquer it. This is the confrontation that the entire album has built itself up to having. The meeting between Frank's true self and the imposter, the cold, hardened Frank that has been forced into submission by society. Siegfried is a warrior in Norse mythology. He's a symbol for bravery and masculinity and almost every traditional value that Frank has stood in contrast to throughout his career. The song is eerie. It sounds like a harrowing journey on the way to a dark battlefield at night, sucking in your fear and anxiety as you prepare to face the challenges that await you. And that's what Frank does on this track, as he finally acknowledges the true subject of the album, the focus of the allegory. He says that this isn't his life, it's just a fond farewell to a friend, that friend being the poorly molded version of himself that has held him down from living the life he's supposed to live. He spends the first two verses coming clean about the American dream, the life society has asked him to live, and how that's not him. He'd rather live outside instead of settling down and having a wife and kids. But the question is, can he do that? Verse 4 is one of my favorite lyrical moments on the project. It's poetic, it's horrifying, it's a contradiction. In verse 3, Frank describes himself as a phoenix, being reborn, but the lines in verse 4 represent the same conflictedness that has existed throughout the entire album. He tries to be positive by embracing gratitude, but then remembers that life is really just a fleeting thought and everything's worthless. It represents a level of conviction that can't be matched by action. After this long, horrible, traumatizing journey, Frank finally has the opportunity to embrace individuality. The entire album has led to this, and he can't. And you know what? I get it. I know it's hard. It seems impossible to plant yourself like a tree and have the entire world tell you to move and look them back in the face and say, no, you move. I don't want to live life as a prisoner. I know it's all in my head. I know what I have to do. I have to lose this part of myself, but I can't. Who am I going to let down? Who am I going to become? What if this is all wrong? I can't do it. I can't become who I'm supposed to be. I wish I could, but I'm not brave.
For you in the dark, I do for you in the dark, I do for anything.
I wrote a story in the middle. It's called Godspeed. It's basically a reimagined part of my boyhood. Boys do cry, but I don't think I shed a tear for a good chunk of my teenage years. Surprisingly, it's my favorite part of my life so far. It surprises me because the current phase is what I was asking the cosmos for when I was a kid. I don't know, maybe that part had its rough stretches too, but in my rearview mirror it's getting small enough to convince myself it was all good. But really though, it's still all good. In an astonishing character portrayal on the penultimate piece of the story, Godspeed sees Frank dismissing the other part of himself goodbye. He opens the track with the encouragement that he will always love you and always be there for you, but he still wishes his allegorical counterpart Godspeed, which is a phrase often used as a goodbye, a final remark to wish someone well. The song is beautiful. It's not happy, but it's not sad either. It just feels like closure. And it looks like Frank has gotten there, but at what cost? Yeah, Frank is bidding himself goodbye, but it's unclear what part is being left behind. The optimist in me thought for sure, I knew for a fact that it was the old Frank being left in the dust. The growth had manifested itself. He's in a new place. Things are finally changing. But the more I listen to this album, the less it seems like he's changed. That's what this album means. He's literally telling us he can't do it. We can't change. Growth is nothing but a lie. We're stuck in this cycle forever and ever. And it's not fair. We've given everything to this. To finally be the person we have to be. Why can't we just let go? Well, what if Frank didn't have to change this whole time? This whole album was about trying to progress, trying to change, trying to become the person we're supposed to be. But what if we already are? The unorthodox closure on Godspeed is Frank Ocean's stand against the entire world and what they want from him. For the first time on this album, Frank isn't struggling with himself, not because he became what he was supposed to be, but because he became himself. One thing I've struggled with throughout almost all of my adult life is the idea of legacy and what I want to impart on the communities I leave my imprint on. There are ideas, stigmas, expectations around everything I do. I'm supposed to act this way as a Christian, do these things as an athlete, spend my time doing X, Y, and Z as a college student so that I'll finally be successful and people will think highly of me. And yeah, that's even how I feel sometimes with this channel. Don't get emotional talking about these projects, that's too soft. Just talk about the music and peace out, dog. That's how video essay channels do. And yet, if there's anything we learn from this project, it's that trying to be in tune with a part of yourself that isn't 100% authentic will never lead to peace and happiness, regardless of how hard you try. In a complex, convoluted, and hard to process fashion, Frank is really just telling us to be ourselves. Yes, we should push our limits, and yes, we should improve on our weaknesses. Yes, we should try to be the best we can every single day, but to do that, we don't change, we grow. And once you can finally do that, there's nothing else to do except to wish your future Godspeed. Futura Free is cathartic to hear. It's a victory lap, in a way. The track's keys are adventurously peaceful and pleasant, and the track develops into this diary entry-esque rap where Frank reflects on his success and developing life situation. He uses this sleepy melodic flow that actually ends up as one of my biggest wow moments on the album at the 3:38-minute mark where the trap-flavored instrumental comes out. And yet, despite Frank sounding in his most at-peace mood on the entire album, the song still feels like it comes from a broken place. And that's because the song is about... what? Death? No, that can't be... that... At first glance, it seems like the title Futura Free was just an odd artistic direction he decided to go in, but as with everything else on this project, it means a lot more than that. The title references the famous font style Futura, which was used by Stanley Kubrick for almost all of his branding. His most popular films used that font as their promotion, and it's no coincidence that Frank also used that font on the cover for the album. But Stanley Kubrick is gone now. Futura, Stanley Kubrick, free. Stanley Kubrick is free. The track is an ode to growth and celebrates improvement, sure, but it's also a snide longing for death and the desire to be free from the shackles of life. The song has no clear direction. Frank can't stay on topic, there's no clear song structure, it ends with a 5-minute long clip of his younger brother interviewing their classmates. But the last line on the entire album asks, how far is a light year? A light year mathematically is 9.4 times 10 to the negative 12 kilometers. The runtime of the last song is 9 minutes and 24 seconds, or 9.4 minutes. How far have we come? And how far do we have to go? These are the questions we're left with at the end of Blonde. And I finished learning about all these songs and this entire project, and I don't have an answer. I know we always want to know where we're going and what's in store for us next, but maybe I'm just alive and trying to grow, and that's not linear. That's not cohesive. That's not something you can wrap up in a 40-minute YouTube video, so maybe we should stop trying. Blonde is a story about a kid at heart struggling to figure out who he is in a world that just wants to define it for him. And through that struggle, through that grief, through that failure and reconciliation, we can learn to have the confidence to say, this is what I am, and if you don't like it, deal with it. It is Tyler's interview talking about Odd Future and the pushback around the impact they were trying to create. It's Frank wishing Godspeed to the version of himself everybody else wanted to see. It's me making this video even though I don't have an answer, I'm just as lost as you, but really, that's the beautiful thing about it. Even if we don't know where we are, or where we're going, or what life has in store for us, all that matters in the end is the strength to figure it out on our own terms. And if we don't, people will do it for us. So go. Whatever that is for you, put everything into it. Don't do something just because it's right or easy or expected. Go for whatever genuinely makes you, you. And yeah, I'm struggling at that myself, but I'm getting there. I don't know how far I've come, but I've got light years to go. And I'm sure you do too. Godspeed, my friend.
Menage on my birthday, tap out on the first stroke. 'Cause this ain't no work day. She don't give head anyway. 'Cause what Nick say, that's what she tell a man.